Tonight's topic, of course, is Pacific Northwest up in smoke, wildfires, forests, and climate change.
Tonight I'm here to talk to you as a resident of Seattle, as someone who thinks and is concerned about future climate, who shares the air that we all breathe, now here in Seattle, in the state of Washington, and around the world, and to talk about and think about whether it is the fact that we all share the same burden when we experience some of the negative consequences of climate change. And I'll steal my own thunder, and I'll say that the answer is no. But it doesn't have to be that way, and so we're going to explore that a bit, but I'm going to first sort of back up and revisit some of the climate science information. So I work at the University of Washington Climate Impacts Group. As my bio alluded, we deliver a lot of science to decision makers around the Pacific Northwest region. That's anywhere from a range of tribal nations to the governor's office, to our state agencies who are responsible for monitoring the quality of the air that we're breathing, designing the roads that we drive on, and the many, many, many parts of our daily lives that we take advantage of every day that will be touched by or are already being touched by a changing climate system. Next slide, please. So this is a synthesis statement from the National Climate Assessment, which is a U.S. Synthesis of the best available science for a region. There will be a new assessment published shortly. This is from 2014. But one of the key takeaways for our region here in the Northwest is that climate change will alter Northwest forests. I think Brian made a convincing argument for that. And that there are nuances, and those nuances matter, right? We are in store for insects and disease outbreaks, and we're forcing longer-term shifts in forest types and species, right? This is, I would argue, a bit jargon-laden, and I think points to the bigger question is, why do we care about climate? More importantly, what can we do? So in the face of those things, what does one do? Well, we try to look towards the future. Next slide, please. And the future doesn't look so bright in terms of thinking about forest health and wildfire. By the 2080s, the median area burned by wildfires, that's the area of forest, we talk about it in acres. I was thinking about, well, what's an acre? And I kind of have conceptually an idea. But apparently a football field, if we take away the end zones, is an acre-ish, minus a few percent, so imagine that. In the Northwest could be more than double relative to 1916 to 2006. Again, a bit of jargon, but in all of our future scenarios, we expect more and bigger wildfires in the Northwest. Next slide, please. So this is a loop of a satellite image that was taken this year on the 20th of August. You can see the wildfire smoke swirling around our region. You can also see the smoke be delivered from the Cougar Creek fire and travel around. It's quite mesmerizing. But I'm going to stop here in this mesmerizing loop with a bit of a personal story, right? Is that as I started, that so we all share the air. For those of us who were in Seattle or Washington or the greater Western region, or even on the East Coast this summer, we were breathing the smoke that was produced from wildfires in the US and in Canada. And that smoke travels quite quickly and long distances. And that impacts all of us, right? I happen to be an asthmatic. I like to bike commute to work. Sometimes those things don't intermix. That's not actually a terrible burden, but I think, being stuck with your in-laws is perhaps a burden. That would be, yeah, I feel you. I don't think my in-laws are watching. This isn't being live streamed, so yes, I'm with you. Right, but not to make light of it. I've spent most of my career as an earth scientist, physical scientist, thinking about how past climate changes and what that means for the future, thinking about precipitation. And now I find myself looking towards the future, but thinking about what is that we do now, and having hard conversations with myself, but also with decision makers, people that we all in this room hold accountable for helping to shape the future that we all want, right? And I don't know that this is the future that I want, Actually, I do know this isn't really the future I want. It might be the future I get, and I'm realistic about that. But the question is, are we prepared? And are we preparing in a way that ensures that we are living the best, most equitable, and resilient way we can? Are we thriving? Are all of our communities here in Washington State thriving, right? That is a fundamental question, and that in fact is a choice. Next slide, please. And it turns out that smoke travels fast. There was that loop, right? And we were all breathing it, those of us who are here. And the smoke doesn't need a passport, and so the next speaker will talk about the implications of smoke, right? It doesn't, my husband told me to tell this joke, and I'm gonna do it now just to make him happy. Smoke doesn't need, wait, no, smoke has a nexus pass. Wah, wah. Right, so this summer, right, we were surrounded by fire. It's not just fire burning in Washington, it's fires burning in British Columbia, which happens to be another nation, if you didn't notice, which means when we start talking about policy, it matters. This is an international issue that touches all of us. Next slide, please. So the question is, it's an international issue, it's complicated. The future is gonna bring more and bigger fires. This is a quote from a piece in the National Geographic that was published this August, featuring a range of scientists from around the country and in the Northwest. And I'm going to read it because I think it's important. Hospitals have seen an uptick in respiratory complaints. Fair. I'm pretty sure that's true. Pools closed. Bummer. Soccer practices were canceled. And apple pickers on the eastern slopes of the Cascade Mountains were encouraged to wear masks when they were able to work at all. And I think this paragraph for me is incredibly illuminating, right? I just said it's inconvenient because I didn't get to bike to work. There are serious implications when we think about the consequences of climate change, not only in our personal lives, but in this paragraph demonstrates that it's not only inconvenient for when we want to recreate outside, it has serious implications for where you live and where you work. People's employment and lives are threatened by climate change. And that is complicated and also unfortunate, and I think we all have a role to play in developing solutions, and it points to the need for well thought out, well crafted, equitable solutions to climate change. Next slide, thank you. And I'm not gonna belabor the point because I'm sure I'm running short on time, but the way that we describe this in sort of academic community and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we were all exposed, if you live in Seattle, I'm using the royal we because I'm pretending you were all here and you all were breathing the smoke. We were all exposed to the wildfire smoke. In the future, there will be more and bigger wildfires. We theoretically will be exposed to smoke. But how well we cope or respond, or the extent to which we're vulnerable to those impacts, differs. And there are key ways in which that differs. So where you live and where you work can make you more vulnerable to the consequences of climate change. Not just the air that you breathe, but again, there are a range of impacts that we're expecting. Fire is one of them, floods is one of them, extreme heat is another. And so where you live and where you work have really meaningful consequences for how you will feel and what your lived experience is of climate change. And next slide. And this is going to cue us up. In fact, it's a quote from our next speaker, clever me, which I think is actually sort of my central tenet moving forward in a space in which I work, but also where I find hope, which is that we need to adapt to climate change, right? We need solutions. Those are individual actions, and I would argue importantly, those are well-crafted, equitable, informed policies that use science and that plan for a future and choose for planning for that future now and adapting for that now, because that will cost money, that does require political will. But we also have to mitigate the root causes. And that is the fact that we continue to emit greenhouse gases, carbon and methane among them. And well-crafted, smart policies need to account for both of those. And they need to account for the ways in which we will experience climate differently depending on who we are. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Nevis.